If you've been following along with the Reckless Ben Lego scandal at all, you know that there is a certain company that shall not be named who has managed to make most of the internet very angry with them. And they are quintessentially the evil corporation that everyone hates, which I think is part of the reason why this scandal has become so big, because it's literally embodying everything that everyone hates about greedy capitalism in corporate America. So I'm not going to say the name of the company because apparently they do regular internet searches for their company name and also their personal names to issue cease and desists. So they shall be known as the company who shall not be named, or the corporation that shall not be named, whichever one. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, if you don't already, just Google search Reckless Ben Legos, and I'm sure you will be able to find out which company I'm talking about. I kind of feel like it's in, what is it, the last Harry Potter movie, where if you say the name Voldemort, then it like triggers him to know that you're talking about him. So yeah, so the company that shall not be named, I do not want them on my channel. So I think that they are giving us a masterclass in how not to do things. So if you were ever wondering how to not be an evil corporation, I think we can take the things that they're doing and do the opposite, and then we'll be great. So the first number one in how to not be an evil corporation is to actually care about people. Because it seems pretty clear that the company that shall not be named does not care about people. They don't care about their customers for sure. They don't care about Brian. They don't care about their franchisees, it doesn't seem like, since why else would they be putting all their franchisees in this very sticky position of needing to make money, but also they've run their name into the mud so much that nobody wants to buy or, do anything with those stores. So they don't care about their customers, they don't care about their franchisees, and it kind of seems like they don't really care about their employees unless the employees are of a certain religious sect. So it would all be easier, as everyone in every comment section on every video I've watched has pointed out. This would all go away if they actually cared about Brian and his dad and their family's legacy in Star Wars Lego. Like, if they saw Brian as a person, they would have at least listened to him. But because they, from what it sounds like, from what people have said when explaining the backstory of when Brian was trying to work with them, it seems like he walked in and said, hey, this is a thing. I have an agreement with you guys. And they said basically what Evil Twirly Mustache said. Nope, didn't happen. So they didn't even give him the respect of listening to him in the first place. So step number one is care about people and listen to them when they say they have a problem. And step number two is to take responsibility and keep your word, because they are not doing that either. They have not taken any responsibility. They put the blame off on people that are no longer part of their company, former franchisees, and they're saying, we didn't make any agreements, therefore it's not us, we're not keeping our word. We didn't give our word. But on the one hand, they love hiding behind the fact that they're a corporate entity. And on the other hand, they don't stand behind the actions of the entity. Because as far as Brian knew, he made an agreement with the corporation that shall not be named. Whoever agents, employees, authorized persons at the time, specifically he made the agreement with, doesn't matter. He made an agreement with this corporation that shall not be named. And so now that it doesn't suit them to back that up, they are claiming that he did not make an agreement with their entity, and therefore, tough luck. Toodles, doesn't count. But this is step number 3 of how not to be an evil corporation, is don't hide behind entities. Because we all know that businesses don't really exist. There is no such thing as a business. There is only people doing things, providing services, making trades, making agreements with other people. Now, legally, we have this thing called the corporate veil, which I've talked about in blog posts, so I'll link that in the description. But legally, we have this thing where you as an individual person are an entity, and you can create a separate entity to represent your business. And so then legally, if you have all the businessy things under the business entity, that separates you from being personally liable for your business's actions. So you're basically creating This is why they call it a shell company. You're creating a shell around yourself and saying, oh no, it was the business that did that, which is exactly what the corporation that shall not be named is doing. They're saying, oh no, we had an entity that now no longer exists. Therefore, it was all the entity that did the thing. But as we all know, because we are smart people who live in the real world, entities never existed. It's only for legality, it's only for finances, because if the corporate veil is intact, which means that you keep your personal money separate from the business money, and it's all, there's a nice little line there, then if someone sues the business, if you have that intact, then only the business's assets are liable to be used to pay back whatever lawsuit happened. If you have muddied the waters by having a bunch of back and forth between using business stuff for your own personal stuff and putting your own personal money in and taking business money to use for your own personal stuff, like if you have a bunch of back and forth, then a judge or the IRS could say, you didn't maintain the corporate veil, therefore whatever the business is on the hook for, your personal assets are also on the hook for. So having a corporate entity is still a good idea, but pretending like it actually exists when we all know it doesn't in the real world, relationally, working people to people, then it's insulting and it's a cop-out, and it's like calling time out right before you're going to get tagged. Like, it is a low move to make, because entities, policies, bureaucracy, theoretically, all of these things exist to make things more fair, but they can also be used for a negative thing. So if you're protecting your actual personal assets from a business's liability, that's a good way of using it. If you're hiding behind an entity and saying, oh, you made an agreement with the entity and that entity no longer exists, therefore we, the people behind the corporation that shall not be named that you thought you were doing business with, aren't on the hook for any of that, that is lying. And that's why everybody is upset, because we all know that this is BS, and they don't actually get to say that it's like a ghost. It's like saying, oh, a ghost took your Legos. This other entity took your Legos. Whoops. We don't have to do anything about that because we're not the same entity. Like, it's very obvious that that entity wouldn't exist at all if you, the actual human being, had not made it. So you, the actual human being, are on the hook for whatever your entity does. And legality, financially, you're creating separation between you and these other activities that you do in another thing's name, but it's still you behind the curtain. It's still the little man behind the curtain who's calling all the shots and pulling all of those strings and doing the thing. And ultimately, it is you, the human being, who's going to have to answer to other human beings and to God for the BS that you pulled, claiming that it was somebody else and some other entity. So we, who are good people, who are wanting to build good businesses that do good things for other people, I think the corporation that shall not be named gave us a very strong masterclass in 3 easy steps to not being an evil corporation. Step number 1, actually care about people. If someone comes to you with a problem, listen to them. Even if you don't think they have any grounds to complain, possibly most of the time, people really are just complaining. There are plenty of Karens who would make you think, oh, I shouldn't listen to anyone. But you should still listen to them because they are a person, and you should have respect for their personhood and give them the respect of listening to them and hearing them out. Then you can decide whether or not it's a legitimate complaint, whether you actually have a responsibility to address it. But you have to listen to it first before you make all those judgments. And in caring about people, most of the time it has to do with the heart and the spirit behind the thing. So sure, the corporation that shall not be named is hiding behind their agreement, their paperwork, their contracts, their licensing agreement that exists or does not exist. They're hiding behind all of this stuff because this is legal. There is a good chance that they would win on strictly legal considerations because all of these laws and loopholes exist. And so if they're using it correctly, there's a good chance they would win on that alone. But no interaction with another human being is that alone. It has to do with the spirit and the heart behind it. And so if the corporation that shall not be named heard Brian say, my family, my dad, my dying dad, put his life savings into what he believed was an investment to provide for his family, like that should have been the end of it. That should have been, oh, wow, this is very important to you, and we're going to do what we can to help you make things right. And maybe they didn't have the paperwork. Maybe there really was not a licensed agreement for consignment, but they could have fixed it. They could have said, oh, we'll make the paperwork match reality instead of trying to make reality match the paperwork. And then step number 2 is to take responsibility and keep your word. When you do have an entity that is now bigger than you, you've created a business, the business has a brand, the business has a name that is not your name, it's a separate name, and you have other people that are doing things under that name, what they do is part of the name that you created, the business that you created, but ultimately you're the one who's responsible for it. So if the former franchisee made an illegal consignment agreement and she didn't do things right and she didn't keep her records right and, all the things that they're saying she's doing, maybe if she did, even if she did all of those things, it's their name that's on the line. It's their name that Brian made an agreement with. It's their creation that is now being scrutinized for it. And so if they were actually taking responsibility for the thing that they created, the entity that they brought into being, they would be wanting to take responsibility for the things that that entity had agreed to. And they would be keeping the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law, as far as contracts and consignment agreements and whatnot. But they have, which is pretty clear from the other company that shall not be named that the dad, who shall not be named, owns, it's pretty clear that this is their MO, is to create an entity to then be the scapegoat for the bad things that they do as human beings. Because if they actually cared about the business entity that they created, they would be taking responsibility for the things that that business is on the hook for. But what they're doing is hiding behind this separate thing that they created and saying, oh, see, we don't have anything to do with it. We're just cherubic little evil twirly mustache dudes who we don't know, we didn't know, we can't possibly be held responsible for that. Which means that they don't actually care about the entity that they created. They just wanted a scapegoat for anything that went bad for them that they could then put off on the business and say, oh, well, I personally don't have anything to do with this. It's all the business. It's all this entity, that the corporation that shall not be named, and or other corporations that were created and used and then dissolved and or renamed and or re-registered and incorporated in a different state. And like all of those shenanigans about shell companies and not suing the correct name and all that stuff, all of that has to do with corporate entity, business entity creation and the letter of the law and contracts and legal paperwork, because like there's no way that they would get away with all of this if they personally were dealing with if their personal assets were liable for making all of this right, they would be singing a very different tune. But they think they can hide behind these other entities that they've created, multiple layers of them. So if one gets hit, the next one gets hit, the next one gets hit. They've created armor against having to do the right thing and having to deal fairly with other people. And that is what makes them an evil, greedy corporation. That is what makes everyone angry. That philosophy of, oh, it's the business. Oh, this is just policy. Oh, this is just the system. This is just the way it works. None of that is real. And we all know that. That's why we get mad when, the little checkout, the self-register checkout at the grocery store is wrong. And if the employee comes and says, well, the register just rung you up twice, so I guess you have two things, like you'd be mad, because that's not how reality is. You did not have two things, you just rung it up by accident. So the other person in this equation has to correct the system, has to correct the paperwork, has to correct the contract, has to correct the business entity, because that doesn't really exist. Only other people really exist. And so if we want to have businesses and create businesses that are not evil, capitalist, greedy corporations, we have to remember that we are people dealing with other people. And that's the only thing that really exists. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a business entity. I'm not saying that you shouldn't keep your finances separate. Those are still good things to do, but you can't hide behind them if you want to have a good business that does good work for other people. You have to be fair, and you have to actually care about people. And this is so shocking and groundbreaking to say, but obviously someone needs to have told the corporation that shall not be named that this is how the real world works, because they are going to hell in a handbasket because nobody told them. So I would like to see your business do well and not crumble from the inside out. So hopefully some of this can help later on down the line. If you're dealing with someone that you think doesn't have a reason to complain, just remember you're a real person and they're a real person, and that's the only thing that really exists. Corporate structures, paperwork, contracts, procedures, policies, all of that is created by you, and you can uncreate it just as easy as you created it. And the only thing that should be the final consideration is whether you're treating the other human being right.